Hi, welcome. I'm so glad you've joined us. This is probably the strangest world event you've ever encountered, and I doubt you've been given the tools ahead of time to cope with such a crazy time. I can imagine you're feeling nervous, uncertain, anxious, stressed, tense, and worried. That makes a lot of sense to me. And I hope you'll stay with us for all of the meetings. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Angela Poach, and I'm a registered professional counselor. I currently work through the Feeling Good Institute Canada, and I also do some life coaching on my website. I also have some self-help videos. Anyways, that's a little bit about me. Let's talk a little bit more about like what's going on with COVID and how is it affecting us so much emotionally. Aren't we all hanging out in our houses watching TV and eating potato chips? Isn't that wonderful? Unfortunately, it's just not that simple. We all know that. But let's just dive into it a little bit because I think it's important to understand that you're not alone if you're experiencing really high levels of anxiety or depression. And we're definitely feeling it. Everyone is feeling it. So the American Psychology Association did a study. Stress in America was a national mental health crisis, and they found that 8 out of 10 adults say the coronavirus pandemic is a significant source of stress in their lives. So that's, 78% and almost 80% of people said it's a significant source of stress. And many experts are saying, pretty close to 199% of us are affected in some way. 3 in 5 adults say that it is actually overwhelming to them. So you have this significant number at 80% and then 60%. So over half of the population is feeling overwhelmed. And Generation Z adults on average say that their stress level is at that high level. A lot of people are experiencing this, these stresses, and we're finding that the younger you are, the more stress that you're feeling. So that's really significant, because this is the time in your life when you're expecting to be enjoying life and pursuing a career or at least getting to know yourself and wondering like, what do I want to do with the rest of my life? But there's this blanket over us right now that just really is dampening that joy and experience, and adding to it some economic things. So we'll talk a bit more about that later. So another quote here from Healthline. It says, nobody's immune to the stress that's happening right now. Different people are experiencing different levels of stress overall. And we're just not built to maintain this level of stress and hypervigilant and hyperarousal for this long of a time. So it's not a matter of like, oh, just get used to it. What's actually causing more because it's become chronic. We'll talk a little bit more about chronic and acute stress in a minute. So Statistics Canada says about 1/4 of crowdsourced participants reported fair or poor mental health. So that's 1 in 4 people have fair or poor. And over half reported that their mental health has gotten worse on the onset of physical distancing. That was kind of the key factor for half the people. And most participants, over 88%, experienced at least one symptom of anxiety. So no one is left alone here. Anxiety has definitely gone up. Stress has gone up. And then physical distancing has really increased that along with some other things. So what we're seeing in all these facts and studies that the 2 most commonly affected group are the young adults, millennials, Gen X, and then those who have financial concerns. So that's the second group, people who've lost a job or their jobs have been really significantly reduced, or conversely, they're considered an essential worker and they're having to work extra, and they're separated from their families, so then their job is affecting their home life. And then the least affected group would be 65 and older, which is kind of interesting because that's who this virus is attacking the most. And I don't want to make light that there are 11% who've reported 11% have reported an increased level in stress. So 1 in 10. So that's still a pretty high number. That's not insignificant at all. And we want to kind of look at, though, what's going on with the other 90%, because maybe they have something that'll help us, right? Um, so these stats, they actually make a lot of sense for those who've studied emotional wellness and are sociologists who've studied societal norms and ebbs and flows of life. Excuse me. The media at large has really installed a lot of harmful ideals that seem great on the outside, but set us up for failure, unfortunately. And when I say media, I mean across the board: social media, TV, news, all of it. We've taken a shift from reality to a false optimism a lot of times. And there's a lot of cultural admonitions and misguided quips, and it kind of twists our understanding of happiness and success. I don't have time to get into all of that today, but suffice it to say that we've been kind of led to believe our circumstances, they have to be tailored in just the right way for us to be happy. And the trouble is, we just have a limited control over our circumstances, and this pandemic's really put that to the test and really shown us that we're kind of at the mercy right now of circumstances we don't need to be. And this is likely why we're seeing with the older generation uh, not the huge increase in stress and anxiety like in the younger generations, even though the older generation, it's more likely for this to be fatal for them or debilitating for them, to cause really significant pain, even if they do survive, because of the tubes and things. And so even though there's greater risk of actually contracting the disease and dying from it and all that goes along with that, the older generation isn't they've got some tools that we want to bank on. And one of those is their mindset. You know, they they've been through a lot already as an older generation, not only individually but also as a culture. And they've learned that what it takes to be happy varies across the board. It's not so much related to our specific circumstances, but our mindset and our attitudes. And I think that is a really important takeaway that we can learn from them. So that's what we're going to focus on this weekend, is how to reshape our thinking process, and that we can do that because our emotions are intrinsically connected to how we think. So unfortunately, we've kind of been duped into believing that utopia waits if we just try hard enough. And I would suspect this is why we're still having this increased stress level for all of us, because as much as I even know that that's true, that it's my thoughts that affect me, that it's not my circumstances, it's still hard to combat all the influences, pressures, I'm not sure that's the right word I'm looking for here, that, if we just try harder, right, then we can be happier, we can have what we want. But unfortunately, as individuals, we don't have control over politics or economics or weather or many other things. Now we do have an influence. Please don't get me wrong. There's some great, important things that we should be getting involved in. Excuse me, but we don't have full control over any of that, right? And these things that affect our standard of living. And I love that we can make an impact and insert an influence, but unfortunately, there's a lot of stuff out of our control. And this is being sponsored. This program, this workshop, is being sponsored by the New Westminster Church, and so I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that the Bible's clear. Things are actually about to get worse. And if you'd like to know more about what the Bible says, I encourage you to put it in the chat and reach out to one of our volunteers, email me, email someone else in the team. We'd love to get you in touch with someone to get you some free Bible studies. And if you'd rather be anonymous and you're thinking, yeah, I don't know, you're welcome to go to amazingfacts.org. They have some free Bible studies there. But that little tidbit, and I didn't want to sound like a doomsdayer, but the point is that what do we do if things are unraveling like around us. Like, how could I possibly have peace and joy? How could I not be stressed with things unraveling around me? And of course, that totally makes sense. That you have every right to feel stressed and anxious right now, and depressed and concerned. There are some real issues that we're facing in this time, and some real struggles. And it's really important to understand that sometimes the most appropriate emotion is anxiety. Sometimes sadness is really the best coping mechanism is to be aware of these emotions and to kind of sit with them. But at other times they get too intense and they overwhelm us, and that's where I'd like to give you some tools to dial that back to a manageable level. So even if you have a really balanced outlook on life, there are a lot of issues facing us right now. As we mentioned in the stats previously, so physical distancing is affecting us in profound ways. We are social creatures, and isolation is not part of our makeup. We're not the Wolverine that just hides out in the middle of nowhere, although wouldn't that be appropriate right now? But that's not who we are. We're more like herd animals, deer and elk and sheep, and these kind of gregarious beings. And that's how we're designed. We're made up. So, and then if you add to this fact that we're so social, financial strain, it's no wonder that students are having trouble completing assignments and struggling to finish school or to get good grades even. It's just been really a real challenge. Teachers feel disconnected from their students, like there's this wall between them. And the students, they recognize that. They feel that as well where we interact off of each other, right? We kind of feel what's going on for each other, and that disconnection is causing some real strain. And many people are out of work and wondering if and when they'll get back to work. Will there even be a job? I mean, some companies are actually making more money because they've cut out middle management, and it's quite a roller coaster for everyone. The prices for some staples have tripled, even quadrupled, even though there's a mandate from the government that there should be no price gouging. Unfortunately, we're just seeing, I have friends and they're in the middle of a construction project, and the prices for lumber literally tripled over just a couple weeks. And so what they had banked on, what they had planned to be their budget, is just out the window. And it's just no wonder we're all feeling so stressed and worried in these uncertain times. And it just makes so much sense to me that you're here listening to this and wanting answers and help. In fact, the strain, the tension, the nervousness, even panic, these are normal. You're not alone. You're not crazy. You're not like not good enough, or all these other platitudes that I hear. You have every right to feel the way you're feeling right now in this moment. And my heart just goes out to each one watching this and here in this seminar today. It is really, really hard and really tough. And I think it's appropriate for you to be feeling these things right now. The body was designed for acute stress. And so all these emotions have their place. We panic when we see a bear. Well, most of us up here in the country don't typically panic when we see a bear. But it's the flight or flight response, right? And the amygdala fires, and we're like, whoa, something, warning. Like, anxiety is not red flag warning. And I'm going to talk more about that tomorrow. So really hope you'll join tomorrow, because I really want to dive into this more. But suffice it to say that we are designed for acute stress. It's actually been known to be healthy. It actually strengthens our immune system. That's not really the right term, because our immune system is always doing its job. It's not like you can boost your immune system or you can weaken it though. So stress can weaken our immune system, make it less effective. And so actually the immune system really gets in action when we have acute stress, and we're more alert, we're more aware, we can actually think clearer, so we can make decisions and decide, is this the time to flee? It's flight, fight, or freeze. And the brain just analyzes, right? Hypervigilant. So that anxiety is there for that reason, for that acute stress. Now, acute stress is one thing, and that could be, kind of this one-time event. And acute stress isn't necessarily just for a few minutes. It can be longer, like it can last for even a couple months or so, because there might be some extra strain, death in a family, for example, that kind of thing. But chronic stress, which is ongoing, that combined with this uncertainty that we're in right now, that makes a lot of sense why that's triggering more fear and depression and anxiety in people, for sure. And another way that it's chronic is because a lot of people are already kind of at their okay level with stress before this pandemic hit. And unfortunately, there's been a stigma to mental health. Plus, there's, it's limited where you can get it. There are some great self-help materials, but so we're kind of just getting by, and then the pandemic hit. So, that's this catalyst for what we're going through right now. So let's get practical, okay? Like, there are two basic ways to cope with uncertainty, and they work together in harmony. So the first is to be clear on what we can and can't do, right? So what do I have control over? What don't I have control over? And the second part is to accept what we don't have control over. Isaiah 41:10 says, "Fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. I will help you. I will uphold you by my righteous hand." This Bible promise is kind of perfect to combine these two concepts, because God is saying, I've got this, you can trust me. But the verse also commands the reader to not be dismayed. Now, how would I force myself not to feel a certain way? I mean, that sounds kind of like, how do you command that? Like, what? I mean, aren't my feelings just a natural reaction to the events around me? Yes and no. It's just like triune of things that go on in our mind. We have thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. And the things that we think influence to a great degree our feelings. In fact, a huge degree. And I don't have stats, because these are the kind of subjective things, unfortunately, in psychology. They're really hard to measure and test, although more and more researchers are finding ways to do that, which is awesome. And so we are seeing that, like cognitive behavior therapy, which you might have seen in the posters and stuff, is kind of what we're talking about this weekend. And that's cognitive is our brain, and behavior is what we do. And this idea that our thoughts affect our emotions is really important. And one of the ways we know this is true, there's lots of research on this, but I mean, just to give you an example would be, I'm sure you've all met people who've gone through the exact same event and have different reactions. For example, you could get on a roller coaster, and some people are terrified and will never go back. It was so much strain on them, and it was so terrifying. They did not enjoy it at all. And other people are like, yay, where's the next roller coaster, right? And we see this with car accidents. We see this with the loss of a family member. We have these different emotional reactions to these exact same events. And that's fun. That's normal. That's completely, it's not right or wrong. We have different ways of thinking. I love diversity. I love that we think differently. I think that's great. So I know I think a little off kilter at times compared to a lot of other people around me. And so I'm glad that there's other people like me too. So this idea that our thoughts affect our feelings is really, really key, because we do have control of our thoughts. We have automatic thoughts. We're going to maybe talk about some tools to deal with those. But we also can ponder, reflect, kind of like stop and go, what am I thinking? What's going through my mind right now? And now I will say there was the other part of this is there is a natural reaction to the events around us by far, and how they're kind of connected too is we have our immediate thoughts, so we call it the conscious mind, and then we have a subconscious, these kind of values, these or these things that we've been led to believe or think, that may or may not be true. We have to analyze it to know if it's true, but we just assume they're true in the back of our mind. So these values, they pop out. To just give you an example of a negative one would be perfectionism, right? So to strive for excellent is great, wonderful, and that would never make us miserable. Not, it's like, oh, like I'm going to try and do better. What makes us miserable is we're not allowed to make a mistake. This unspoken rule in the back of our mind that we've never really maybe have articulated. I know I got to the point where I did know that was what's going on for me. Like, I cannot make a mistake. If I get less than this kind of a mark on the paper, then it's a total fail. And I was quite aware of that, but that awareness didn't automatically deal with it. There's some other tools I needed, and we're going to try and give you lots of different tools this weekend, because some tools will work for you and some will work for others. And so that's the really important thing about being different and unique and having, variety. The good news is there's a variety of tools too. So deep breathing will help some people, it won't help everyone. And so we don't want to dismiss any tools that don't work for us personally because they might work for somebody else, and vice versa. Don't get discouraged if something doesn't work for you, because there's always something that will. Just gotta figure out what that is. So anyways, I digress, but I wanted to give you some hope in the midst of all this talk of negativity and darkness. There's definitely hope there. So yeah, I mean, if someone you love passes away just recently, my dear little kitty, my son's kitty, passed away, and it makes us very sad to think about not having his snuggles anymore, which is completely healthy and normal emotion. And I wouldn't want anyone to take that sadness away. It gives me a little celebration of how much I enjoyed him when he was around. It's a remembrance of what I had. So that event definitely triggered it, right? Like, I'm, wouldn't be sad about him dying if he hadn't died, right? So they do go kind of hand in hand. But it's my thoughts about my kitty that make me sad. So the fact that he passed away doesn't affect my neighbors. Sure they're sad for me, but they're not going to have the same reaction, because they're not having these memories of him being snuggly, chatty. And so his death doesn't affect them the same, even though he did still die, right? That fact still happened, that event still happened. Okay, I mean, that's just kind of a brief understanding of how thoughts and feelings and events kind of play together. Anyway, so how do we deal with this? Like, what do we do about this? Well, how do we not fear? Like, it says fear not, right? Like, this is the title of our meetings this weekend. So what does that look like? And I want to get back to this fact that we're social creatures, and this physical distancing. Remember, we read that study that's what seemed to be the real trigger. Fear of death has definitely increased, and that is something that's been causing people stress. And I do have clients coming to me for that reason as well. But it seems to me that physical distancing is what's triggering all these things to come forward. We need to connect with each other. That is just vital. It's so important for us to have social support. And it's great we have social media. That's one way to connect. But I want to give you some practical tips here about connecting and maintaining social support. So we can go on Facebook and have 100, 200, 500 people on our Facebook page. And there are certain things that we post where we're going to get like a lot of love, right? Like if you post, like I posted that my kitty passed away. Well, I had like 65 people giving me, warm heart, and the sad face, and commenting and reaching out and giving me support. And that was very touching, and I really appreciated every single one of those. They were meaningful to me because I stopped and read each one. Um, and that is a connection. It doesn't need to be dismissed because it's electronic or I, again, I have this issue with, media kind of downplaying ways that we can connect. Um, for sure, a meeting in person is another wonderful way to connect, but unfortunately, we're in lockdown, or I'm not sure when you're watching this video, but your bubble has to be so and so big, or however that the rules change so much. That's not always available. I remember at the beginning of this pandemic, there was a fellow who took a shower curtain. I don't know if you saw this video. Probably a lot of you have. Went pretty viral. He made the shower curtain and he sewed, excuse me, he taped on some plastic gloves so he could hug his grandma. And it was wonderful and everybody was so happy about it. And now when you go back and look at this video, the recent comments are quite critical of this beautiful moment. Everybody's like, that's dumb. I would never use plastic. Just hug her, blah, blah, blah. There's all these negative comments. And that's the other reaction we can have when we don't know the person. So if you look at the positive reaction that I experienced with my kitty, these were all my friends. I didn't make a public post. I only shared with my friends. And I was given good social support. And I don't just let anyone on my Facebook page. If they're part of my Facebook page, it's because I know them personally, and they're either a friend or family. And they might be a friend from childhood. We might not have a lot of connection recently, but there is a connection that we have had in the past, and so we see that very much so in the older generation who is using social media. In the younger generation, social media has kind of gotten like this, like I have to get out there. And so your feeds may not be the compassion base. And certainly if you post it on YouTube in the public forum, now you've taken it one step further. So you see you have these different levels of connection, right? And what I'm talking about building and maintaining social support, I'm talking about the more intimate connection, the really building friends. We can't do that with 150 people, 400 people. We just don't have enough time in a day. Now, maybe during COVID we do, because a lot of us have more time on our hands. Some of us are working more. This is the first time I've worked full time since I was a housewife for years. So for me, I have way less time during COVID because I'm working so much more. But for other people, they have way more time. So you might be able to do X many people. But you have to decide what that is for you, because what's important is the deeper connections. This is what we need and what we kind of lack if we're not mindful of it. If we're not aware that this. So pick a few people, and I don't want to give a number, but figure out how many people you could interact with at least once a week, if not 3 or 4 times a week, so that you really build a friendship. And even if it's only just a couple texts, right? That's number one. Is maintain a bubble, is create a bubble you can maintain. And of course, we want to interact with all the rest. Like I said, I think I can't remember if it's like 500 or something on my Facebook page, and I don't personally interact with all 500. I couldn't possibly. So I still want my bigger bubble. But we have these layers of bubbles, right? And the small bubble, that has kind of been lost, I think, in the newer generations. So I encourage you to build that back up. If you don't know what that looks like, go talk to an elderly grandpa or grandma. They won't like you calling them elderly, but we all know we are elderly once we get to a certain age. So it's really important for you to have that. That leads me to another thing: intergenerational support. This is another thing we're losing in our modern world, and why we're seeing this increase in stress and strain. We actually have less physical events that cause stress now, even with COVID. We have far greater standard of living compared to 100 years ago, 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago. we were under a lot of strain trying to find food, making sure we had shelter, not freezing to death. Like there was a lot of physical strain. Um, and so we kind of assume, well, they must have been miserable because we are, but yet records kind of show otherwise. Archaeology's kind of shown us that there was these collaborations in cultures, and we actually have literature that shows there was still joy and happiness even amid all of that strain. But the difference was it was this intergenerational connection. And so if someone was elderly and they were physically failing, they weren't so much worried about having a good nest egg so that they could afford help or afford a good retirement home. What they relied on was their grandchildren and their great grandchildren to kind of support and care for them, and their children at times too, depending on the age gaps. And there was this intergenerational connection, and so the young learned how to cope with the crisis, right? They learned actual physical tools, like how to chop firewood, or how to fix watches, or whatever that physical component was. But they also learned emotional strength from these intergenerational connections. And there's a story. There's a book called when you. I'm gonna misquote the book, so I'll hold off on that. But there's some really interesting material on intergenerational support and connection, and how important that is for us for our mental wellness. Okay, so first is make sure that you understand you have layers of bubbles. Like, be aware of what those are, and you don't have to write it out or anything, but just know, okay, here's my core group, and then here's my next layer, and then there's like my bigger bubble, right? That's kind of everyone I know kind of thing. And so just be aware of that, mindful of that bubble, and really work toward building up those closer relationships. And the second one is reach out intergenerationally, connect with your family and even friends of the family. I have some pretty good close connection with some of my son's friends, and feel like I have multiple children, even though I only have one child. I love that. I think that's great. I've experienced that even, I would say, as a young adult, early teen. It was 18, 19. I had friends that were older than me. They felt like I was their mom because we just had this more intergenerational connection, and with my parents too. And we're kind of like our own family. We chose our family. If your family isn't cutting mustard, make your own family. My dad was foster. So we have lots of great family. And to us, they are 100% family. To me, I am native. Like, I have so many native I would say brothers and sisters, aunts and uncles that feel like brothers and sisters, some of them, because my parents took them in because of the intergenerational fostering that my grandparents did. They are truly family to me, 100% my family. And no one can take that away from us. Not some kind of DNA tests or anything like that, or society telling us who family is. For us, that's our family. So those are, that's the first two. And the third one is getting deep with the smaller groups, with the intergenerational. So I talked about the bubble size, right, and amount of time you connect. And then I talked about this intergenerational, but then the third piece is really get deep with your getting in touch and communicating. This is so important. With all that's going on around us and all the fear and uncertainty, it can be easy just to stay at the top, right? Arguing, should you wear a mask? Shouldn't you wear a mask? It's not fair. Why did they cancel these kind of meetings and not those kind of meetings? And Bonnie Henry's bad, Bonnie Henry's good. All this that goes on Facebook and other places, right? Like this. That is not building your social structure, and that may be stating the obvious. But I'm telling you, even I, as a professional, have to actually be aware of this and step back from it. So if I have to do that, and I'm like teaching people to do this, then I can expect you also need to bring that to awareness. Like, whoa, wait a minute. What am I doing? What am I posting? What am I getting engaged with? And I'm not saying not to do that at all. I'm saying be mindful of how much of that you're doing and make sure you are still doing those deeper connections. Like, what are you feeling today? Right? You can text someone like, how's it going? I heard your mom's sick or in the hospital, and how's that been for you? Ask those connection questions and like be supportive, like, oh yeah, I'm so sad for you and I'm here for you, right? Like pick up the phone, FaceTime, be mindful of getting deeper and not just staying on the surface, not on just the easy stuff. Because it actually is pretty easy to be angry. Kind of protects us a bit. And also anxiety protects us as well from our vulnerability because we're like, oh, we're hyper vigilant. And it protects us from just that awareness. Like, how scared am I of getting sick? How scared am I of my spouse, my friend, my family getting sick? Like, what would that look like? What would that mean to me? But those are scary, scary, deep thoughts. But they actually can be very empowering when done correctly. And we want to give you some more tools. Hopefully, I'm giving you some tools now, and we'll give you more tools throughout this week. We talked a bit about this is normal. What you're experiencing, what you're going through. This is. I mean, we are all going through this, and even the stats that 50% of us have increased stress in the U.S. and was one in four Canadians have significant stress, and over 88% have some anxiety, right? Like at least one symptom. You're not alone. This makes sense. This is not, hey, business as usual through COVID. We've had to really adjust our entire lifestyle, But right now, if you're watching this, I want to assure you, regardless of the damage done, the baggage that you're carrying, you can work toward finding healing. There are tools that give you back, that empower you, that give you back the control, that reshift the rules that have been implanted there that are not true, that are not accurate, that you're not ever going to be good enough, or you'll never amount to anything, or and we want to reshape these things. And the first step is awareness, and the second step is really learning about cognitive behavior therapy. I highly encourage you. There's some great self-help books. One is called Feeling Great. If you love stories, I recommend Feeling Great by Dr. Burns. But the other book that I highly recommend is called When Panic Attacks. Very appropriate for this time and age. You can probably find it in the library. It's a very, very popular book. It's made the bestseller list a few times, by David Burns, When Panic Attacks, because there he walks you through systematically how you can be aware of your thoughts, and how you can see if they're true or not, because that's step one. Because if you have true thoughts, that's nothing wrong with those. We don't want to manipulate your mind. We want you to empower you with truth. And then some tools on how to deal with that. How do I untwist my distorted thoughts, as we call it in our particular field modality. Some people call it exaggerated thinking or automatic thoughts, negative thoughts, these kind of things. These all kind of the same thing. It's where thoughts get twisted around and blown out of proportion and polarized, all or nothing, we call it, or like black and white thinking, where it's like it has to be one way or the other, but life is generally kind of on a spectrum. And so I really encourage you to look at some of these materials, and please stay with us for this whole weekend seminar. We want to make sure that you are empowered and given some tools to deal with this uncertainty that we're facing right now in COVID. So I really appreciate you listening and watching. Encourage you to come back tomorrow. All right. Thank you, everyone, and have a good night.